Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer Bagnashi with Deep Believer. Thank you so much for joining us again. Today, we have an exciting episode for you today and a little different. This is a story that everyone on the planet Earth has heard. And this one person is working on that site today as we speak. Noah's Ark. He has done radar tests. He lives at the base of Mount Ararat. He does studies on Noah's Ark. He can tell us so many answers or answer so many questions to questions that you and I may have about Noah's Ark. Is it really Noah's Ark? What did they find? Is it really what they say it was? You're going to want to stick around. Andrew Jones, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm always here. I'm glad to share with anyone around the world who wants to learn more about what we're doing here at Noah's Ark.
All right. So, Andrew, before we
Yeah.
start, were you born into a Christian household or how did your life look?
Well, I grew up in a Christian home, a very strong traditional home. We had morning and evening worship together as a family. We had our bedtime prayers. We prayed before every meal. I went to a Christian school for a number of years. Always busy in the church, volunteering with the media ministry or other different types of ministries for outreach. And my parents were involved in the church life too. My father in our church was the elder or head elder for that congregation. So I grew up with a strong belief in the Bible. My brother and I, we would reenact Bible stories as children, to do charades. And the Bible was everything. And it was a real historical document. As a kid, I didn't doubt anything about it. And so I was always interested in the whatever they could find out about the archaeology of these Bible stories or the history about it. And so even from a child, I was really interested in this.
So you mentioned to me before that you always loved archaeology and history. So what was it about Noah's Ark itself when you were a child that piqued your interest?
I remember part of the time I lived in California later on in life, but early on I lived with my family in Ohio. I remember it just stuck in my mind. I remember one time, this had to have been before I was like six, but I remember I made a paper mache. I took pieces of paper and glued them together. So it wasn't really paper mache, but I made a Noah's Ark, and I had these little farm animals I would stick in the, the little rooms. And my father, he had a number of books in his library he liked reading, and he had one called The Ark File by Rennie Norbergen. And in that book, it talks about the different searches for Noah's Ark, and it did include the Drupanar site where we're researching now. But I didn't know all the different controversies, as a kid, but I had that interest and access to this type of these books and material. And so it's intrigued me that it's possible that this mysterious ship that's disappeared could still exist, and that would, prove the Bible true. And so I had, always a general interest in these type of stories in the Old Testament.
And then when you were in middle school, was it middle school or high school that you actually reached out to Ron Wyatt and he reached out to you back? But before you answer that question, could you explain to a lot of people who may not know Ron Wyatt? Because, we've known of Ron Wyatt for about 18, 20 years or so, but you go even further back. So tell us a little bit about Ron Wyatt so people can grasp onto why this is important.
Well, when I first met Ron, personally, I was is right at the end of high school, but back to middle school, that's when I first learned of him. He actually came out to California. It was either 1990 or 91, and it was a school night. I remember it was a Thursday night. He had it was actually a Yugoslavian church in our city there in Sacramento that invited him, but whatever reason, it wasn't a weekend, and so I had homework to do. So I asked my father to go listen to this man because the advertisement said he had found Noah's Ark and Mount Sinai and everything in between. And so I said, "Hey, go find out for me if you can." And my father was willing to do this for me. So he went there and he listened to Ron's meeting and he came back and he said, "Well, this guy said he found everything." And so I didn't know anything about Ron. So I said, "Okay, I'll go." And he had a book, my father said. So I went and found the book at a local Christian bookstore and bought it. And I read the whole thing. It was a paperback book, but small. It was called Discovered Noah's Ark. And I had this tons of questions because it talked about, briefly all of his discoveries and his research. And so this is before the internet. This is early 90s. So there was no emailing or looking up on websites, anything. I called 411 and the operator asked what city they wanted me to connect to. And I said, well, the books mentioned that he had a PO box in Madison, Tennessee, And so I gave Ron's name, and they looked in the records and they found him, and they said, "Well, we can connect you right now to his home." And I was like, "Oh, so okay." And so again, I was early teens, and so I he picks up, and I remember because I would record all the conversations. Now that first one, I just took notes. I remember I still have that original book because in the cover, I was just writing down every blank area of his book, all the things he said in that first conversation. But the very first one, he said, "Call me tomorrow because I'm just coming back from Israel." So I called him the next day, and we had like a 2 hour conversation. And then I called him later in the week, and so I talked to him for many hours from then until I first met him in '95 when we invited him out to California to do 2 meetings in '95 and '96. And then finally, I went out to one of the sites that he had worked a lot on, which was Noah's Ark, where I'm at now. And that was in '97. A friend of mine, an acquaintance from Florida, asked me to travel with him, and I said I'll do it. And my parents paid for it. I was in the middle of college, and so I went out here for 4 or 5 days, and that's my first time seeing the Noah's Ark site, and that has got me really excited. But yeah, so I was just a kid when I first, started talking to Ron on the phone. I remember though that first month when my parents got the phone bill back, they're like, "Who are you calling in Tennessee?" Because back then it was not unlimited minutes. It wasn't. There was no cell service, at least the typical cell service we have today. And so I was calling a landline from ours, and I guess they charged you a lot for long distance back then. So
Okay, so you mentioned that you spoke to Ron Wyatt on the phone and it was a high bill. Yes, we know because back then we didn't have cell phones like we do now. What specific things? I mean, what things do you remember that Ron told you that maybe made your jaw drop or things you didn't know?
well, his book was anyone who's seen the original book, it was very brief on each topic. And so it's just when he says this is Noah's Ark, here's the data, or it was just very brief, couple paragraphs here and there, or a chapter. And immediately I had like a ton of questions. Okay, like how did you get involved in this research? This is before he even had videos out. So early '90s, all he had was this book, and then he'd go around do meetings. And so it was only at his meetings where you could ask him personal questions, or he would show some video clips of the work. But otherwise, there was no film out. There's no YouTube back then. No other big book. And I did find out later that there was a book by David Fazold who worked with Ron called The Ark of Noah, and that was published in 1988. And it was pretty thick. It was David's research with Ron, and then on his own, some of his other theories about the Ark. So I did call David too, and I would talk to even people who said Ron was crazy. I would call or email, or not email, but I would write them. Some people I'd fax them. I remember faxing people and just trying to find out like what do they do, why do they say this or that, or who was Ron Wyatt. And so for me, Ron was this man who had a lot of knowledge and had made a lot of trips to sites in the Holy Land that I would only dream about going to at that age. And so I had a ton of questions just about his work. What did he discover? The test results, this things like that. Just all the details I could get out of him. Sometimes he would actually say, "I can't tell you," and I was like, "Oh man," but it was he was usually open, and so it just for me it was like talking after 4 or 5 years of that I'd do my best to even help him on some of the research I would look into, like whether the depth of the Red Sea crossing or other historical things. But we even made a scale model for him of the pyramid building machines that he had talked about discovering. And so we gave it and donated to his early museums that he had in Tennessee at the time. I don't think they're open now, but some of these scale models we would make for him. So it was great. I did my small part in this, but for me it was more just a personal interest. Just something I wanted to investigate on my own and figure out what this guy was claiming. So I talked to anybody who knew him and talked to the man himself.
But what are some things that he revealed to you that you didn't know about the ark when you spoke to him? Because you say you took notes and you recorded it. What's
Yeah,
some things that he revealed to you that you had no idea about the ark?
but that was like 30 plus years ago. So I'm trying to remember, and
Uh,
I do have a file cabinet in storage somewhere in California
okay.
with all my original notes. I've learned so much more now being here, living on the site, and obviously, talked to him for all those years. But like the first time I talked to him, um, I think it was mainly about the actual. 'Cause I was interested in the inscriptions, and he talked about seeing these anchor stones with it, which had crosses on them, and he mentioned that village where they found these anchor stones or drogue stones, these stabilizing stones. that in this village there were a lot of inscriptions on the stones that were part of the villagers' walls. Like people had reused the stones, and he even saw the story of the flood on these tile that was part of the wall of the village or near the Armenian church that was there that's no longer there. And so things like that, where he would just briefly describe in the book, I would then try to get more information out of him about that. I mean, he even talked more about he had found these two headstones that looked like they were Noah and his wife's grave markers. It had the story of the looked like of Noah and his family, and then the tallest figures in this carved rock. And the first one had the woman's eyes closed, and then the second one, both the tallest man and woman had their eyes closed. It had the eight figures, and then he described that above it, he saw this carved crescent wave, and on the top of the wave was a boat, and then above it was a rainbow. And so, things like that he would mention, I would just try to get more details. Just ask him things like that. And sadly, those things were destroyed because he had published too early information in a book that he had self-published, like photocopied, and he gave it out to people, ark hunters. And by 85, the gravestones were broken up, and one of the graves were robbed. And so, he was freely sharing information. So by the time I got to him and was to ask him questions as a kid over the phone, no, he obviously he was leery at first, and then he would only share what he probably could share because he didn't want things to get destroyed. He was more free with the information back in the early 80s. But yeah, so I don't remember exactly like something new. Everything now, 30 years later, we're doing like more scientific work on this site, and I 30 minutes from the site, so I go there, a couple times a week at least. I guess it's living a dream that I didn't think I'd be out here, but yeah. So the first questions were just kind of just diving into more details about what he claimed he discovered.
That's wild. Why do you think people destroyed them? That's horrible.
Money, agreed.
Mm.
They found gold, and grave robbers. They found gold inside the one grave, and Ron reported to the police when it was March of 1985. They discovered that the one grave was robbed, and there's a huge trench left. And you see in the old videos, David Fazel is actually standing in part of the trench. And even on my tours, you can still measure the trench. It was 18 feet long trench that was discovered that they dug out the grave from. It was a stone sarcophagus box that they found a body inside, and a lot of treasure, a lot of gold. And so then Ron told the police about the robbery, and then they later told him what their investigation showed. And what happened? They basically they arrested a villager who admitted that he was paid a couple $100, $200 or $300, by an American explorer to help him rob the grave. And this guy, the villager said, when they opened up the stone box, there's this giant skeleton, and on the side of there it was a lot of gold. Like one gold piece he's described was a full frontal piece with a lot of gemstones embedded. That later the police told Ron sold on the black market in Istanbul for over $100 million. So this is back in who knows, 85, 86. It's happened when they sold it. Who knows who bought it? And someone is super rich. It's in their private collection or destroyed by now, sold down or taken apart. Who knows? But the sad thing is that a very historical, unique item was lost, and people wanted to make money. Greed. So,
Yeah. Oh my
and
God.
the poor villager, he earned out of all that, he got a couple $100. But when the police arrested this guy, Ron said that the police told him they pulled the guy's fingernails out to get him to talk. So he got the raw end of the deal. This villager, he got tortured by the police, and he only made $300, and the American guy made a lot more, according to Ron. The guy disappeared. The American guy who did all this, and later the investigation got to a certain point level in the Turkish government at that time, and then it was stopped. So obviously someone was paid off or something happened. But this is there are a lot of antiquities out in these countries, and locals with the poor economy, they do what they can to make money, and some of them are into treasure hunting, so they do this illegal type of excavations.
Wow. Now whose grave was that they dug up and found? Was that Noah?
Now, Ron, yeah, well, Ron believed based on the body and what was in it that it was Mrs. Noah's grave. It was a female's grave.
Oh.
So possibly, I don't want to say like, have people out there digging around. The villagers watch the site now, but possibly his Noah is still out there somewhere in that general area.
Uh-oh.
So
Hope they don't dig that up and get some more gold.
yeah, and so far no one's found any, a second grave with that type of, big box because, Ron believed they were larger people back then.
I was going to ask
And
you that. Yeah, because you said there was a very large person in it or a large skeleton. So it
yeah.
wasn't the typical 5 foot, 6 foot, probably a little bit bigger than that.
Yeah, so the box was we could measure the trench even up to a couple years ago before they plowed the whole field in front of this building where it was found. But the trench itself was 18 feet long. The box, maybe it was 15 feet long. Maybe the person was twice the height of us, like maybe 12 feet. So 12 to 15 feet long skeleton could have been inside that box. Definitely larger than today. So.
Yeah. That's wild because I've interviewed scientists and they say the same thing that you're saying, how people were much larger pre-flood as opposed to now.
Mhm.
So why do you think that is? Was
Yeah,
it uh-huh.
well, they're living, I really believe what the Bible says that they're living up to, 900 years. So I don't think they're just midgets running around for 900 years. I think, this is pre-flood, good nutrition, still close to creation. So they're not set in with a lot of sin and cancer and disease. And so they could grow taller, as long as they lived. So definitely, I really believe that what Ron described fits the biblical account. So
So no wonder it was worth $100 million because it was a lot of gold to cover that body. All right.
yes, I can't imagine the piece. I mean, he never saw it, but he was just described to him. Like
Yeah.
they heard reports that this one piece only, who knows what else they found in there, but the one piece was this huge gold um, frontal piece that was covered in the front part of the body, and it was studded with different, jewels. So
Wow. Wow.
that's crazy. I would like to see a photo just
I
to see
know.
who some rich guy has in their basement, or maybe they melted it down. Hopefully not, but maybe in heaven we'll be able to see some of the
Exactly.
stuff that God will show us, these mysteries. So
We'll see it all in heaven. Okay, so you
yeah.
mentioned this one thing. This is interesting. And I'm glad you said it. You said when Ron would tell people, they would think he's crazy. Why did they think Ron was crazy? Was it because he began in medical? Because he was in a medical field, right? Deep Believer Ministries have poured into millions worldwide. Powerful testimonies, deep revelations from the Lord, and messages that draw people closer to Jesus Christ. But now we've reached the point where we must grow. We've been blessed with a 1,400 square foot canvas, but right now it's just an empty room. No walls, no floors, nothing but potential waiting for the Lord to breathe on it. With your help, this bare space becomes a beautiful studio, a space where Jesus is glorified, faith is strengthened, and souls are reached. And just like our first declaration from A Night with the King, your name will be beautifully displayed forever, a replica of the first one, reminding everyone who walks in that you helped build something eternal. You'll receive behind the scenes access, early viewings of our first studio recordings, special live stream access, a studio founder badge, personal thank yous from me, on screen credits, and even a named part of the studio for larger givers. So if God tugs on your heart to be a part of this, simply click on the link that says Help Build Our Studio when you go to www.deepbeliever.com. Together, we will build a home for His glory.
Well, he did start in learning about history. He did take courses in archaeology and I don't know what other classes, but he went and then he switched majors and went into medicine, and so that which was great for him because that helped pay for his trips. He became a nurse anesthetist, and he said he made good money at it. And he was a single parent, so he was raising three kids. But he was able to later in life, when they were older, and he could leave them or bring them on his trips, do these type of trips. Back then, I think now it's cheaper to travel, I believe, versus back then. You have more flight options and easier to buy tickets. You can watch people's videos. And, you can set up your travel itinerary on your own without a travel agency. Back then, it was it's very expensive, and just this part of the world was very tough to travel in. Not much information out here. And his first trip out here, when he wrote about and talked about, it sounded like an Indiana Jones adventure because they were robbed, almost they got sick, the sons got sick. So they had quite an adventure. That was 1977. And so this was kind of like the Wild West back then, in this part of Turkey.
So, back to the ark, because this is the fun stuff. Everything we're saying is fun anyway. What was the time difference between, say, the beginning of the start of the earth to Noah's Ark? How many years was that, would you believe,
Well,
approximately?
if you just use the Masoretic text, I don't know what the Septuagint has, but it's around 14 to 1500 years from Adam's creation to when, you add up the ages when they had their children and just keep adding it up to when they passed away. Keep going down to when Noah entered the ark, which the Bible gives the year, how old he was. It's about 1400 and 1500 years from the Hebrew Bible. And so, then from there, you can add up more. So we're, basically 6,000 years. If you, some will say this, 10,000 years or less if they're different versions of the Bible. But I'm a young Earth creationist. People think that's crazy. Well, people think Noah's Ark. Doing research with what you think is Noah's Ark is, like looking for the, Santa Claus or something. It's this fables. And so, for me, I never even thought of that. But of course, then maybe I look crazy. And so when Ron talked about something like that, I already believed in the biblical account, so I didn't think Noah's Ark was a crazy story because I already believed the Bible. So
The biblical story goes, the world was so evil, so
mm,
corrupt, that God had to destroy the earth because basically there was no hope in these crazy people. So the only the only righteous
yeah,
family was Noah, and God warned
yeah,
Noah, I'm gonna destroy the earth, build a ship. All right. Now, how
yeah.
long did it take Noah to build this ark? Because God gave him specific measurements and everything on how to build this ark. So how long did it take?
Well, the first thing I want to mention that it's really interesting in Genesis 6, which talks about this whole story, like how the earth was wicked. But it says that, and then Moses, who I believe wrote Genesis under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he writes that Moses or Noah found grace in the eyes of God. But when Moses wrote Genesis about Noah, he wrote that Noah had found grace. And even later, you read, I think it's in the New Testament where it talks about Noah by faith believed what God said and made an ark for his family. Like he was thinking of his family and anyone else who would believe the story what God told him. Obviously, only his family did. But it took him 120 years. The Bible is very brief in the description of the ark. It doesn't mention where Noah's bed was or how many animals were on the ark or where is there a toilet? We assume there was. This all these type of details for a ship. All it says was the dimensions and that it had one door, a window at the top, and it had three decks. And so that's all we know. And from the rest, you can fill in the details, use logic, or just assume things. And so this, obviously, God gave Noah though complete instructions how to build the ark and what to do because this was a gigantic storm that was going to destroy the world. And Noah needed every little instruction. He didn't, just assume things. I'm assuming that's what it was like. But in the Bible, we just have a very brief record. But it took Noah 120 years.
To build the ark. Okay, so how did the measurements go? Because when you read the Bible, you're like, what kind of measurements are these? So
Yeah,
how do we now um
yeah.
you know how do we basically decipher what was the correct measurements back then as opposed to right now?
Well, so the Bible, there was no inches or meters or feet back, when Moses wrote this. This was 3,500 years ago at the time of the Exodus in the late Bronze Age. So we're looking at measurements that made sense for the people back then. So that would include the cubits. There's different measurements, but the cubit was the main linear measurement. But there's different types of cubits. You had the short cubit, and then you had each country almost had their own cubit. But what's interesting, during the time of the late Bronze Age, the time that Moses was writing Genesis, Egypt was one of the main superpowers in the world, like America is today. But just like how today we have the metric system, where what they use in science and or outside the U.S. they use, uh, back then the Egyptian royal cubit was the main system of measurement that was acceptable by different countries. And so, if we look at the Royal Egyptian cubit, it was a standard. You can go to the museums like the Imhotep Museum near Saqqara, the museum, I think the Cairo Museum itself, maybe even the new Grand Egyptian Museum has these standard rulers, like a set standard for the cubit. And we know for American measurements, that comes out to be 20.62 inches, basically, for that 1 cubit. So when the Bible, Moses writes the Noah's Ark was, for example, 300 cubits long. You times that by 20.62 inches, and then to get the feet, you divide it by 12. It comes out to be 515 feet long. Guess what? The boat shaped formation is exactly 515 feet long. Like we've measured it different times with lasers. I've been there with people who had lasers. Other times they've used lidar, which is a type of laser, but like shooting all these laser beams at the site. So we have a complete model of Noah's Ark. We can turn around on our computer and measure things out. And then people have used standard measuring tapes. I was there with a guy from Texas, and he was a tourist on one of my tours a couple years ago, and he wanted to measure the ark for a video just to show that yes, this is 515 feet long or 300 cubits. And I helped him, and he was going on the topography of the ground, but it got basically 515 feet long. So the size, the shape hasn't changed all these years since they first measured it. 66 years ago when it was discovered. So yeah, so Genesis in some Bibles, if you look at the NIV and some of these modern translations, they will convert it, like they'll put it in a measurement that we'll understand. But sometimes they'll use the short cubit. So if they use the shorter cubit, then you're talking about 450 feet, which is too short. The standard of measurement during the time that Moses was alive was the Royal Egyptian cubit or the longer cubit. Look at the book of Acts. They talk about Moses being educated in Egypt. And so if he was a prince of Egypt, maybe even next in line for the throne, he's educated in their so-called like university system. And so he will know about the Royal Egyptian cubit. And that's what matches exactly at the Drupanar site where Ron Wyatt was researching.
When was the ark first discovered? Because when you first look at it with the normal eye, like, oh, it's just like maybe some like little hills and there's a little valley, and but like people say, when you look at the actual shape, it looks like it's oblong with points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a pointed end and the other downhill end is rounded. No, it's ship shape. The ark itself was discovered on, made worldwide news in September of 1959. That's when the first news about it was published. 1 month later, in October, the first photograph of the site, which is a high altitude military aerial photograph, was published, and that went around the world, including the American press. But the villagers knew about the site 10 years before that. In late 40s, we've interviewed villagers too. One of them who remembers, he said he was like 10 or 11 at the time. That one morning after an earthquake, they woke up and the whole mountainside, which is behind me, this mountainside here, was all rubble. Before that, it was smooth, and they were doing farming out there, like growing natural hay and just cutting the hay down. But it was just smooth terrain. Right after that earthquake, it was all rough, and the only smooth part was the boat formation, which is I'm leaning over because it's right behind me. And so that was the first time the villagers recognized that there's something strange. There's this boat shape there. They didn't know. Sometimes they say now that, well, we wonder about the boat, but I don't think they realize the implications of what they're looking at. But at the time, though, they did say that this smooth shape, the shape of a boat, was there. But it wasn't until 10 years later when they flew airplanes over this area to map out Turkey that it hit the public press in 59. And so that story, when it hit American press, there's a number of Christians who were looking for Noah's Ark who saw this story and they wanted to go investigate it. And so June of 1960, they came out here and they actually teamed up with Captain Drupanar. He was the discoverer of the site. And so Captain Drupanar, the Turkish military, and this American team had a businessman, a reporter, a photogrammetry professor, an archaeologist, and a couple other people. They all came out here and as a team, and they spent a number of days on site looking at the site. And then the report was published in Life magazine on September 5th, 1960. And that's what Ron Wyatt gets involved. In a sense, that's the first time he hears about it himself and sees the photographs from the June expedition. And that gets his interest. And he really wants to come out here at the time, he said. And he was in his early or late 20s, I think it was late 20s. He had 3 children already, or a number of kids already, and he couldn't travel. The kids were too young. And so he ended up just waiting until 1977, almost, that would be almost 20 years later, that 18 years later, that he's out at this site in 1977 with his 2 teenage sons. and he sees it for the first time. And that starts his journey of doing his work through the 80s, mainly on the site.
All right, so we're going to go into it. All right, so now we're looking at what you've been working on. And this is what it looks like from an aerial view. So when we look at this point right here on the left-hand side, is this the front of the arc?
Okay, so what we're looking on the left hand, yes, that the pointed end, which is the left hand of this photograph, is the upper end, or what most people believe is the front of the arc. So it has a traditional ship shape where you have the pointed bow and a rounded stern. Now, here's an interesting story. So I'm not a shipbuilder or engineer for this type of thing, but this in June this year, we had a large tour group come out here from a church in Miami. A Hispanic church came here, and they were just so enthralled. They had saw Pastor Rick Renner's videos with me the year before, where he was doing stuff on the site, and he made a little mini series for his television work. And so, anyways, we're here with this church at the visitor center, which is right above, looking down on this arc. And this guy comes up to me, an older guy, and he says, "You're Andrew Jones." I was like, "Oh yeah, that's me." And who are you? And he's like, "Well, I'm a retired Coast Guard captain with the U.S. Coast Guard, and I've been with the Coast Guard for 30, 40 years, and I was captain of two ships." And he said, "What you're looking at out there is the best ship design." I'm like, "Whoa, what? Tell me more." And he said, "Yeah." So he said, "Right now I work in Saudi Arabia as a consultant for the Saudi military, but before that he was on the National Security Council of one of the Bush presidencies." And anyways, he was an expert in his field because before that he was with the Coast Guard for almost 40 years. And so he told me, we later did an interview, which is on my YouTube channel, but he gave an interview at the Anchorstone Village, which we have the big stones with the holes. And he was explaining why you would use these type of stones. We call, technically drogue stones, which are stabilizing stones. But he also talked about ship design. And he said, since World War II, he said the destroyers we built in World War II, they had a pointed bow or front end and a rounded stern. That was the best way for ships to cut through the waves and have best stability. And he said, in starting in the 1990s, the Coast Guard did the same thing. They started making their Coast Guard ships with a pointed bow and a rounded stern. And he said, if you have these stabilizing stones or methods on the boat, you could point the boat into the oncoming waves, and that will slice right through the wave, the ship that way. He says, if you had a square or a rectangular box floating out there in open seas, like some people try to promote Noah's Ark, the ship usually would become parallel to these oncoming waves. And once you're in between two waves, and he calls it the trough, that's the technical term. But when you're in the trough, he said, you are more likely to capsize. And of course, once you capsize, you're finished as a boat, and the waves will just turn the boat over. But once you can point into the waves, and you had a pointed bow, you'll slice through the waves, and it's a gentler ride, and more stable for the boat. And then for the rounded back end, the rounded stern, which we see at our site here, the Drupenar site, he said any oncoming waves coming from the backside would disperse when it hits that rounded stern. So you have, and he went on to about more of this, but basically, this is the best ship design that he was seeing there on the side of this mountain here in the mountains of Ararat. So it was really, just a random person coming to the visitor center at the right time that we were there, and he had all this knowledge about ship design. So
Wow.
amazing.
So why did people think it was a rectangle?
Well, because they take the word ark in the Bible and they say, well, that's the exact same Hebrew word is used for Moses, who would put as a baby in a bulrush basket, an ark on the Nile River. And then the word you also have it used for the Ark of the Covenant. And they say, oh, well, these are. Then the other thing I'll mention that we have the three dimensions given in the Bible: the height, width, and length of the ark. And so they assume in their mind that then represents a box shape. But if I were to tell you I had a 1,500 a square foot home, what does that tell you? Does that tell you how many floors? Does it tell you if it's a L-shaped house or a long square house or rectangular? No, it doesn't tell you anything. All it tells you is that my house, it has a footprint of 1,500 square feet. It has the capacity. And so we believe that's what Moses wrote down when he wrote Genesis, is that he was describing the capacity of the ark and not this shape. And the word ark itself, you can go to the Cairo Museum, which I've been many times, the ancient or the Egyptian Civilization Museum, where they have also artifacts from ancient Egypt, and you'll find examples, real examples of these reed baskets. the same type of ark that Moses was put in as a baby. And guess what? And some of the displays will have three or four different designs of these actual baskets that are thousands of years old. So you have round ones, oval ones, square ones, rectangular ones. So the word ark has nothing to do with the shape of the vessel, but more about the capacity or the functionality. And if you looked at when you were there at the Ark Encounter in Kentucky by Answers in Genesis, they have a display in there. And I took a photograph when I was there in 2018. But one of the displays talks about the shape of Noah's Ark. And it mentions that the word ark had nothing to do with a box shape. And so it's just basic common sense, like designed for box shaped or barge shaped boats are shallow water boats that are near harbors or going up rivers, not way out in the open sea with a big storm. That's the worst design. Again, I'm not a shipbuilder. I'm just repeating what others have said. And so using common sense and also just looking at what other Christians have pointed out that the word ark does not mean, a rectangular or square box. So all of that leads to, okay, the best design is a ship. And here we have a ship behind me in the photograph.
SolomonFair.com is officially open. Our grand opening is here. Shop with purpose and support faith-based businesses that reflect your Christian values. Shoppers, this is your chance to discover incredible products and services from businesses rooted in faith, all while uplifting the Christian community. Business owners, don't miss this opportunity. Listing your business on SolomonFair.com connects you with believers eager to support what you offer. Want to stand out? Secure a featured spot on our site during this grand opening. But hurry, spots are limited. Here's more. Like our page on social media, post about Solomon Fair, and use the hashtag Solomon Fair for a chance to win one of 3 open loop gift cards. $100, $50, or $25. Join the movement to shop faithfully and grow the Christian economy. Whether you're a shopper or a business owner, SolomonFair.com is the place where faith and community come together. Visit SolomonFair.com today. SolomonFair.com.
What is this you have here? Because you said now these are GPR radars. What is GPR? And explain to us what we're seeing here. What are the reds? What are the blues? The greens? What's everything we're seeing here?
Yeah. So radar is a way to look below the soil. It's a type of technology that's non-destructive, that's used by geophysicists. So scientists can then look below the ground and see what's going on without actually like digging up the site. So it's a non-destructive way to determine what's below the ground. So archaeologists use it, geologists use it, other engineers use it when they build buildings, and people even use it for construction of bridges to see the health of the concrete and the rebar in the concrete. So again, you can peer below something and into something and not destroy the site. So on Noah's Ark, we used this is the 2019 initial results. We used radar. We hired a random team. I could spend hours talking about that trip. I need to make a video about it because God had opened the way for all of this to happen on a specific time, and we ended up having the Science Channel there at the right time when they had already planned their trip months in advance with the permits, the film permits, and they have to schedule in their budget. So they already picked a certain week in October 2019 to come. And then suddenly we get permission to scan the boat, and we have to fundraise $25,000, get a team out here, sign contracts, everything in place, and have perfect weather to do the GPR work. And all that worked out. So the week that the team comes out, the Science Channel's here, and the day they start working was Monday. Now, the week before, there was some rain. It was a very cloudy and cool weather. But that week that they were here, on Monday they started the work, and Thursday they finished. And then they had Friday, which was an extra day to see some sights before they flew home on Saturday. This GPR team had perfect sunny weather Monday through Thursday. And on Friday, when we went to see the Ottoman Palace nearby at the tourist site, it rained on us. So, God planned the exact perfect weather we need for GPR, because if it rains during the scanning, the penetration of the radar is less. And so we were trying to go as deep as possible with our antennas and scanning the ground. So God had arranged everything. And then we had the Science Channel here filming the action. And these people we had hired, they're kind of random. There was a friend of friends. We put the word out. Someone contacted me. I explained our needs. They said, my friend is a VP of a company who can do radar work. And I talked to the company owner. Within one weekend, they had gave us a 50% discount on their price. They picked their team, they got trained, and then we signed contracts and everything, and they got out there and did the work. And so, some of them might say, well, you guys, you think this is Noah's Ark and you're trying to force the results. No, we brought in a random team, basically. And some of them were atheists and they were just there to do a job. Same with the Science Channel filming. The guy, the producer from England, he was like, oh, we don't believe in Noah's Ark, but we're here because we're hired by the Science Channel to make this film for them. But the result, which you can, if you put that back up on the screen, the red, which is really interesting because we gave the results, the raw data to an American archaeologist who trains people on GPR. And so he was saying, he found this was the results from his analysis. He says, look, in this area where you're seeing these, for his one, it was the red for his represent high density. So he believed, like to the south, like to the left, right side, he was finding right angles. And really, he believed that these are possible walls or rooms. And he said, if I was an archaeologist, I would excavate right there. Because he said in nature, you usually don't find a series of right angles going down. Now, also in this results, he is picking up some of the new discoveries we made a couple of years ago in 2023 when we gave the data to another geophysicist. We lost contact with this guy and we said, okay, let's find someone else. And I had reconnected with Dr. Sali, the geologist out here. He was retired now. But he said, I told him, like, look, in 2019, we did these scans, but I need someone else who's not part of our team to look at it and see what they can find. And so we just turned over the raw data to this lady from Connecticut who knew Dr. Sali, an American lady who had 40 years experience in geophysical surveys. She has her own company. And so she took 6 months because, she's doing it for free. And she looked at the data and she called me one day and said, hey, let's do a Zoom call about this. But I'm finding on this site that there's a central tunnel going down from the pointed end to by the rock. And that right there near the rock is a huge void with that red area right there. This huge empty cavity that goes down to 41 feet in the center part of the boat that almost, it has right angles, a square shaped room. And so she wanted to know if we had dug there. I said, no, we haven't dug anything. And she thought maybe there's a utility line going down Noah's Ark. She didn't know about the site. I just said, no, this is on a mountainside. The nearby village has no line going through here. And that ended up being in the news this year. It went worldwide. We were almost every month in the news about these new discoveries with the GPR data showing possible rooms and central corridors or hallways in Noah's Ark. So it was very, very exciting. This was all the data we had collected back in 2019.
Okay, so I want to go down because we're on your site now. Noah's
Mhm.
Ark scans. Now, is this what you were talking about right here, the central corridors?
Yes, yeah, that was one of the images that this
Okay.
lady, she's analyzing our raw data, and then
Mhm.
they filter it. And they have their software that can look below the ground, like in the data set. And she said, "Look, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing these red lines here are voids." She said, "Like rooms that are not filled in with dirt, and the
Mhm.
blue would be the dirt." She said, "At this level, which this is cut off, but the meters down would be on the other end of this image, but I put up the slice of it. Anyways, this is probably about 4 or 5 meters down. We're seeing this. So if you convert that to feet, we're looking at uh, what is that? 12 to 18 feet down. 15 feet down. That we are seeing this tunnel, and it goes straight down the middle line, and then it enters on that left end of the pointed end right there, the left side of the graphic, is another red hotspot. Like these tunnels connect into a central room, and then,
Mhm.
so from there it would have tunnels going down the boat, which logically that's how they would access where the animals or the food was stored. You need to have a way for them to walk in between the rooms. And then she saw a broken up one even on the inside edge, that's that top arch right there, the inside western edge of the hull. There's nothing on the bottom part. So she put the person who did this was a Swiss graphic designer, but he kind of did a dash red black line down there on the bottom part. You assume if it's Noah's Ark in a boat that would have symmetry. So if there was an inside hull on one end, one side of the boat. The exact same thing would be on the other side,
Mhm.
but maybe on that eastern side there, it's just all filled in with dirt or decomposed away, and there's nothing left. But definitely, we're seeing this central corridor going down the middle of the boat to this central cavity or atrium right in the center that goes down 40 feet. So these are places where we want to stick a camera in and see what's going on. And we even had a famous company. I'm not going to mention their name, but a billionaire contact us because he wanted to number one fill to fund the work, and we don't know if that will happen, but or God wants that to happen. But at the same time, I asked what was his interest, and they have equipment where they want to stick down into these cavities and get DNA samples if anything is left in there. So their interest is to resurrect whatever animals was on the ark. You can see how that markets the original Jurassic Park
Oh my
animals.
gosh.
Yeah, so that was their interest, and we've been on and off talking with them over the last 4 months. But we'll see what happens next year. But at any rate, we would like to stick our own cameras into these cavities, get samples, our own. Who knows what's in there. The goal is to find man-made, objects or
Right.
right angles or the floor and walls, doors, things that would show that it's not just a rubble and rock. So
So what
yeah,
are
there it is.
there it is. Okay, so now this is a different view. What are these four images right here?
Well, so during that 2019 expedition, we asked the radar team uh, to scan three areas of the boat with as much as possible. So they did a zigzag pattern in these three sections, and the most important thing was that bottom one was finding right angles, parallel lines, perpendicular lines. You can see the light blue, and
Mhm.
this was actually being filmed by the Science Channel when they discovered this. So we have live video when they're scrolling through the data. It's about 3 feet down, or 9 feet down, 3 meters is where we discovered these perpendicular lines, or parallel lines too, in that little area on the eastern side of the boat. We're not still sure on the other sides if there's there's a central hump in the middle that might have more remains of the ark. That's why there's a hump. And then there's another little valley or trough on the west side, that top image. But that data, we're kind of near where we're finding the right angles. We need a core drill into that to see what it is. So this was again just an area that we had focused in the radar to see what we could discover, and so that was the three spots. Well, we did scan the whole arc though, and that's what you see the other image, the whole complete scan done. Yeah.
So what about this right here? This is interesting.
Yeah, so I mentioned the right angles. So with the 100 megahertz antenna, which is an antenna that lets you go really deep, but not in like high resolution, you can find big objects. But at the 7 meter, 21 feet level below the ground, the archaeologist who gave us this image said this is where he would excavate. So that's the area where he's mentioning he's seeing these right angles, and he called it structure with depth because it's not just a shallow feature like 1 centimeter thick, right in that area, 7 meters down. No, this is actually has depth to it. So when you're slicing and dicing, it's like a cake. As you're going through these layers, that right angle still shows up going down a number of meters. So it has depth. It's a feature that's not just a shallow feature at 7 meters. It also continues down lower than 7 meters. So it's possible walls. Again, we need to core drill down into there. But the guy pointed out that normally you wouldn't see this type of reading in a natural object. If this was just
Mhm.
rock and dirt, it would not show something like this. The radar would just show rubble. And here we are actually seeing right angles.
This is wild. Okay. And then
Possible rooms. Maybe that's
yeah.
where they stored the food, or this is 7 meters down. So who knows? We're guessing, but yeah, they're possible rooms.
Okay, so have you guys sampled any of the dirt yet? Or is
Yes.
okay. And is it
Yeah.
different from the dirt outside of the ark as opposed to inside the ark?
It sure is, yes. And this was something I have a tour group out there right now in the last of the season before it snows. And even today, I don't have a photograph, but today you can even see this is why we did the sampling. Today, the grass inside the ark is orange color. It's a different color. Right outside, it's a lighter color. And so there's something going on in the soil. Now, back up 1 year ago, in September of last year, we had a soil scientist from Australia on one of my tours, and he told me that he had this background. But I said, "Well, I don't have anything to, scheduled to do any work." But you'll meet Dr. Salih Bayraktutan, the geologist who lives, the Turkish geologist who's been studying the site. Come and let me just, enjoy the tour, see the site. So he came out here, and I pointed out to them, the first time I noticed it, that the grass at that time in September of last year was yellow. Outside was kind of a light green. So I knew right away. I was like, "Hey guys, you notice this? There's the grass is different color, meaning that the soil and the nutrition or something's going on that's different just inside the boat. The whole boat area versus right outside." I know everyone, the critics at least, always claim that, well, this object is there because mud came down the mountainside. There's an obstruction, like a big rock, and it went around it and it formed a boat shape. Or another guy says it's a solid rock that came down, which is not, it's dirt. But the guy who's saying that this is just raw, mud that builds up around a rock, they're, what they're basically saying is that the mud inside and outside the boat shape is the same. It just formed a different shape because it hit a big boulder. So here we have the grass inside the boat growing different color. I asked the experts, Bill, his name is Bill from Australia, and then Sally, the geologist. I said, "Hey, can you guys design a soil test, a survey that we can look at and discover what's going on below the soil?" And at first, Bill wasn't sure. He's like, "Well, we don't know what's going on." I said, "Well, it could be maybe less water's coming in because we had the pitch inside and outside of the ark. Everything was covered with waterproofing pitch, according to Genesis, and so maybe that's affecting over time as it decayed. It's keeping in the soil, so less water is entering. So now the grass is yellower. Who knows? But let's just find out." So they designed a test that took 20. They picked 22 locations, scattered inside and outside. There's 12 inside, 10 outside, and then they took 4 samples around each location, so give you an average basically. And then they sent it off to Sally, did that, and he took it to the Ataturk University where he used to teach in Erzurum, about 5 hours west of here. And their lab there did the soil test. Now we even have another university that has a lot better laboratory equipment testing again, new stuff, and the same thing over just to make sure. And then so it's another Turkish university that's starting that just right now, actually. But the initial results, what we got last year, it came back in December, and I remember when Sally first sent me the photograph over WhatsApp of the initial results. It was this blurry, he had a cheap Android phone, and it was this blurry photograph. I was like, "Sally," I was really wanting to see the results to see what was going on. I was like, "Send me a better picture." Finally, he sent me the PDF file from the university lab, and I was in Switzerland. I remember uploading it to Chat GPT and Grok, and I didn't mention Noah's Ark or a boat. I just said, "Tell me the difference between the two groups of samples." Because we have so many samples. That's why they designed to have 88 samples taken, so that we could do stats, on this and not just one set. Now, let me back up. Ron did. We're not the first to do soil tests. We're not trying to obviously repeating someone else's results is good in science. If you get the same thing that they did, then that means something. But we're not trying to claim that we're number one in doing all this. Ron Wyatt did take samples in 1979. He took two. One deep inside the ark after an earthquake had cracked open it. And then he took one sample out in the mud flow as a control to compare the two. And he found out just from 2 samples that inside the ark, there was a much higher carbon content. And that was it. Now we come along, 50 years later, basically, and we're wanting to do the same thing because we saw the grass color different, color of grass, but we're taking 88 samples that gives us a good average of the soil inside the boat versus outside. And so it is different than what Ron did. And we tested across different things, not just carbon. So what we found out, this is the most interesting thing, is that inside the boat, it's almost 2.5 times higher organic matter. And then you can run a formula on that to get the carbon. There's an average they do. And so I ran the formula on that. Bill told me what it was as a soil scientist. He said, "Run this formula." So I did. And it comes out to be exactly almost what Ron had in his report from 79, which he only did carbon. So we're doing organic matter, and then there's a percentage of that's carbon. And so there's a formula you can do on that, and it matched what he did with his only 2 samples. So it was really cool seeing that validate what Ron did with our 88 samples, but we got a lot more data because it shows not only was there 2.5 times more organic matter inside the site, suggesting that this large wooden vessel that we're proposing as Noah's Ark there, as wood decays, it would affect the soil and it would leave organic matter content and raise the organic matter of the soil. And this is what the test results are showing. And then we also tested for the pH, and it's 8 times less pH inside versus outside. And also the potassium is 138% more inside versus outside. So a combination of all that together suggests that this is an ancient wooden vessel that's decaying there, and not just the same soil that you see outside on the mud flow. And so this was really cool because this is stuff that a Turkish university did, a Turkish scientist collected, and there's something there that now we can say chemically this soil is unique or distinct versus right outside. And so no one can say it's the same material. No, we have a boat-shaped object that has 2.5 times more organic matter, and so it's very exciting. And now we're doing more tests to determine other properties of the soil. So we're moving forward. So you can see myself and Dr.
Oh, right
Sali
here.
right there.
Okay,
Yeah, so Sali Barak Tutan, he's retired now, but I first met him in 2000, and he was the assistant professor of geology from Ataturk University at the time. But he was called in back in '84 or '83 by the Turkish military to check out Ron Wyatt and these other people. He said they called him in and said, "Well, we have these foreigners doing investigations around Mount Ararat, a very sensitive area, and they're claiming they found Noah's Ark. Can you go investigate them? See what you're seeing as a scientist." So that's how he got involved, and he was been involved since that time until now, and he's retired now. But he really believes that it's a man-made object, that the explanations given so far do not match what you see on the ground. Those people try to say that's a natural formation of some type.
Mm.
It doesn't work out. So.
No, it doesn't. And then so now this is what the ark would have looked like inside. Is this what you guys were seeing? And
But
this
yeah, we're it's a theory. We want to get more data because this is I think that's the deepest level. Yeah, so it was really deep inside the mountainside. We're going to get more data down there from different types of geophysical surveys that'll go deeper than what we have today so far. But yeah, we're working on reconstruction models of the site based on our radar so far. Yeah,
okay.
those black and white ones. I would love if you pull up any of those. I can talk about. Yeah, here's one. So this is the original photo from '59.
Now where is
That
the
you can see
ark?
the boat shape. It's in the middle, right? Move your mouse a little up, now to the right, down. It's if you zoom in, right there, almost yeah, to the left of that.
Oh no, I'm
Well, there
someplace
it is.
else.
That was a
That's
better one, maybe.
hilarious.
But that's okay.
Okay.
That was a zoomed out one. This one though was taken in '61 by Ari Guler.
Okay.
He was the Turkish photographer that the military at the time hired to. He was a famous photographer, and they hired him to fly a little airplane. They flew him over the Ark, and he was interviewed a couple of years ago. He passed, or 4 or 5 years ago, he was interviewed. He passed away a couple of years ago, but we did meet him in Istanbul once at his cafe there, and quite an interesting guy. But he flew, no, they had flown him over a low altitude over the ship shape, and he took these photographs. He took a whole bunch. I've seen the archives of all the photographs he took, and it helps us when our studying the site and our research, because basically what it shows is that this ship shape is not sorry, it's not natural there.
Hmm.
The way it's sitting there in the mud flow, you can see that the mud went around it,
Yeah.
and it covered the shape, but it didn't form what you expect out of a natural object with the rounded end uphill.
Mhm.
Instead, the pointed end is uphill. And so it's not naturally formed with mud flowing on a rock. And the other thing that's interesting is that this shape has stayed the same all these years. So if you were to look
Oh.
at this old photograph, there's erosion still going on. But if you look at the photographs I've taken with my drone today or last year, the terrain around outside of the ship shape has changed over time. Different earthquakes every winter, but the ship shape itself is
Wow.
still the same size, width, length, and still the same shape. And so
Mm.
that suggests that there's stability. There's something underneath it holding the site together. There's another photograph he took, these different angles that he took these photographs in
Wow.
1961 on the low-flying airplane. So these are very important historical documents
Wow.
that allows us to see the shape, the site before some of the earthquakes happened that dropped the soil away, and is important data that we're looking at there.
Now, so how come they can't be dug up? I mean, would it
I know everyone always
hurt?
asks. Yeah, we try.
Yeah.
We're asking too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's you get different reasons. So number one, this is in Turkey, so you just can't randomly go there and dig up anything.
Yeah.
It is a national park, so you got to get special permission. Number two, to do an excavation of any site like this or any other site, you need an archaeologist that's interested. So it has to be under control of a Turkish archaeologist, which means they're getting funded. They got permission from their university. Now, in Turkey and like just like the U.S., you have believers, but you also have non-believers. You have people who say Noah's Ark was a fable, and those who believe it, but maybe not put their career on the line looking for it. So what you're looking at is trying to find an archaeologist who's willing to spend the time, fundraise for it, put their career on the line, excavating Noah's Ark, or what they think is Noah's Ark, or what we're saying is Noah's Ark. And so that's a problem because it's hard to find someone like that who's interested in this topic. That's from a Turkish university. Now, Salih, who's a geologist, we can do geological studies through him, and he really believes it's a man-made object. And of course, if it matches the biblical account, it's in the right location, it's ship-shape, and it's the right dimensions, then we think we're onto the the right thing here, and this is the real site. And so right now, because of how fragile it is, they have not allowed any type of digging on the site. We're working towards our next step is doing core drilling, which will allow us to get samples deep in the site without just like making a big square hole like they do in archaeology. But doing maybe a core that they use in geology and in archaeology, which would be a lot smaller hole. But then we can stick cameras in, we can pull out samples, and that will be really, of course, useful versus just using radar. So that's our next step. We're hoping that we get permission for the coring.
Okay. Because the Bible does says that it rested in Mount Ararat.
Yeah, it said the mountains of Ararat in Genesis chapter 8, verse 4.
Okay.
So plural. So if you look at the word Ararat, and this is really interesting, we in fact talking about this today with the tour group, that Ararat, the English word, comes from the name of an ancient kingdom. So it was a political entity, a country
Hmm.
out here called Urartu, and that's where, and it's actually called that by the Assyrians. The people who lived here didn't call themselves Uartians or Artuians, whatever they call them. They had another name for their country. But the Assyrians said this is the country of Urartu, and this is where we get the word in the Bible when it comes to the English word Ararat. And so if you look at if today if someone were to rewrite Genesis, let's say Moses was around, he would basically say Noah's Ark landed in the mountains of Turkey, or
Hmm.
the political entity. Like I could say Noah's Ark landed in the mountains of Colorado or Canada. It's not one peak in the Bible mentioned. It's just a general area, the
Area.
mountainous area of this country. And so we're in the right area. There are two remains and archaeological sites and their castles all around where we're at. Uh, this town I live in, Doe has a Uartan castle right overlooking the town.
Okay, what does the castles look like there? Because, when Americans think of castles, we think about the European castles. Are the castles there different than the ones in Europe?
Similar functionality where you have high walls, gates, towers protecting the gates and the corners. So very, very similar, but these were built in rugged mountains. And so it's amazing the engineering and technology, like the one here in Dobizet, it's not, like the different walls going all the way up. And just all on the side of the steep mountain. You can't imagine how they did it. So it's similar because it's the same functionality that is preserved people inside if there are invaders coming. Also to control, you put your castle there, you can control the trade routes, watch over your territory. And so this was a very mountainous kingdom, and they had a lot of castles built. On our tours, we see at least let's see, one, two, three, four Urartu castles in our different areas we'd visit.
Wow. Okay, so as you're describing all these things, and we're looking at Noah's Ark, the architecture of it, the structure of it, the fact that it lasted this long, and you just mentioned the castles. Would you say, because honestly, we're taught in school, you're American, we're taught in school at least in America, in the Western world, that people before us were pretty dumb, ooga ooga living in caves. So would you say that people back there were possibly smarter than we are today, and maybe things weren't as so, I guess, dumbed down as we believe it was?
100%. You're right. I really do believe that even based on the biblical account, you have people before the flood doing alloys on Cain's line, and I believe the Seth line would have did the same thing. And so you're finding metal readings on the ark. So the ark wasn't just built of gopher wood with pitch. It seems like the metal was used. These alloys. It's before what the archaeologists would call the Bronze Age, which is the alloy of copper and tin. In the book of Genesis, it mentions that Cain, his name was Tubal Cain, one of the grandchildren, or whatever, the line of the wicked, he was doing this work of making alloys. And so here we are looking at the possible, the remains of Noah's Ark that has, which I do believe it's the remains of Noah's Ark, but it has metal in it. So they had technology, and I'm sure, if we were to excavate fully the boat, it would show more advanced technology than we think for that time period they would have. Definitely the ship design showing that even the Coast Guard ships today are using this similar basic concept. This shows that God knew what he was doing when he described and gave Noah the architectural plans to build the boat.
Okay, so and then you mentioned another thing to me. This is interesting. So you said that when you guys did excavate the ark as much as you could,
Yeah.
you found that there's some wood that has not decayed. Why do you think it hasn't decayed? Was it because it was protected by pitch or what?
Well, no, we have not excavated yet. That's our plan. We're hoping to do that. First we'll probably end up doing core drilling before a full excavation is ever done, if ever, on that side. And there's people have suggested even tunneling in from the east side, which is on the other side away from the visitor center, which has like a 30-foot drop. So when you're walking at the bottom of that side, you're kind of deeper in the formation. You could drill in or make a tunnel. So it's a non-traditional archaeological way. But what you see on top of the site, we're talking about the chemical analysis of the soil thing. What's near surface is more exposed to weathering and decaying. But we haven't dug down to expose anything that's shown on the GPR. And we do hope to do that. The GPR, though, is showing that deeper in the formation, there is some type of structure that we think is man-made because it has right angles, parallel lines. It's showing layers, and so it does suggest that this is man-made and not natural. So if it is man-made and the GPR is picking it up, that means there are things that were preserved over thousands of years and did not decompose. So there's things we'll have to study more once we get down to those layers to figure out why did they decompose, whether it was a form of petrification, the earth got, covered up the ark there. Was it because the wood back then was this special wood, this gopher wood that was covered with pitch? So it's, the decay took a longer time. There's many ideas that, we'll find out when we get down to those layers. If you look at how Roman and Greek ships earlier, Bronze Age ships, how they decay, you'll find like they'll leave a footprint, they'll leave the shape, or they'll have just a couple timbers left at these archaeological sites. Someone put a graphic together, an acquaintance of mine, where it has on one side different photographs of this Darupanar boat formation where Ron Wyatt was working, and on the other side they had the same type of angle from an actual archaeological wooden vessel that was being excavated, like 4 or 5 different examples of different ships around the world, and you can see clearly that the Darupanar site is exactly what you expect to find as the vessel decays. It leaves this type of shape. It leaves a chemical imprint. There are possible, really believe that there are deep under the ground, well-preserved timbers. But what's near the surface is more, you have to look at the molecular level, kind of like microscopic, the chemical analysis that no one's really, in-depth analysis. No one's really done that with the soil or the rock types that could tell us more about this formation that matches the biblical account. So, we really believe it's Noah's Ark, and we're just wanting to reveal more. Ron did a lot of the hard work in the past and promoting it. We're not here to, take any credit from that, but we want to reveal more with more modern equipment. And of course, there's a new generation who've never heard of this site. And, we get 50, 60 people a day during the top tourist season and each busload coming through. So sometimes we'll even get like 150 with 3 or 4 buses. These are tourists from around the world, and they're coming here, and they're able to then learn about the story of Noah's Ark. A lot of people in the world don't know it. We even get cultural tours from like Taiwanese and Japanese tour groups coming out here on a cultural tour, not on a biblical tour. And I get to tell them the story about the flood. They never heard of it, or they don't know the details. And at the end, they all, they're very polite. They clap and they want photographs with us, and they're really enthralled about the science. And so we're hoping that we can, reach those type of people with the data that we're collecting that shows the Bible is true. That's what the whole point of this is. So,
All right. And then, yeah, exactly. The proof that the Bible is true. So, would you say that science is actually confirming the Bible?
oh yeah, for me, I've never seen something. I was asked by the Science Channel when they did my interview. I don't know if they even put it in the film, but they were saying, "Well, what if this proves this boat is like millions of years old? How would that go? If you believe the Earth is young and the flood was over 4,500 years ago, or whatever. How would that affect?" And I said, "Well, I think science is catching up. It's always finding proof of what the Bible says." There's things we don't understand yet. And so you can't just say, well, if the science doesn't match with the Bible, then that means science is true and the Bible is wrong, because science is always changing. 200, 300 years ago, what we know today versus back then, it just shows that they're evolving and coming up with new theories and new data. And so I'm not going to put my faith to say, well, science is correct, and I got to make the Bible fit that. I really believe the Bible is the Word of God, and it's a solid foundation, and that science, what we've known so far has not disproved anything. I know some people think that's crazy, but no, I really do believe that the data out there, this basic information about these different sites, it tells the story that's in the Bible, and so it gives us more information. Sometimes it gives us exactly the same information. Other times it just helps expand more of our knowledge of that world back then. And so, I really do believe that you can use science as a tool to reach people.
Amen. Amen. All right. So, how about you said that they found possibly Noah's wife, her grave. Okay. How close to the ark was that? Because I'm sure it wasn't laying right next to it, right? So how close was that to the ark?
So the site of the Duruppanar Noah's Ark site, you can find it on Google Map. It's right beside the Uzungeli village. And if you go northwest from this site, about 20 miles is the village of Saglak Suyu, which means healthy water. And the Kurdish name, or the Armenian name for the village, is Arzap. And it's in that village where Ron found these drogue stones with the holes, and also this ancient building that had the headstones that had the story of Noah, uh, the eight people, and had a crescent wave, and on the top of the wave, the boat with the rainbow above it. It was carved on these two big headstones outside of that village. So that's about 20 miles from the Ark. So it looks like, if that is Noah and his wife, they stayed in the area. Everyone else dispersed from here. No, it's really interesting. If you go west from the site along the valley, you go over just a little hill. It's walkable with your animals. And the next river valley system right over there is called the Murat River. And we show people this, but the Murat River is one of the main tributaries that forms Euphrates, and
Wow.
which goes all the way down to Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf. And it was one of the big biblical rivers in the Bible. And that just starts right near the Ark. And so if you look at the Tower of Babel story, it talks about in Genesis, I don't know, that's 10 or 11, I think chapter 11, but it says the people dispersed. It says that as the people journeyed from the east, meaning they're going west, they come to a plain called Shinar, which was in Mesopotamia. And so if you look at where this site is here, you can go east from here, going west. I mean, go west from here. So you journeying from the east, you get into this river valley system called the Murat River, just over a little hill. And that river valley system has fresh water. You can have your flocks and herds follow it with your children and your families, and you can migrate down that river valley system, the natural highway, and it goes all the way to Mesopotamia. So it fits the biblical account even for the dispersion of the people after the flood when they built the Tower of Babel. Even though they came from Noah's Ark and they go to the Tower of Babel, the geography here matches perfectly. So,
Wow. Okay, now if anyone would like to see the ark, if they want to visit, well, not the ark itself, but what you guys believe, is the Ark area, is it just for scientists or can the average person visit as well?
No, anyone can go on their own. There's the Ark down on the valley floor there, and there's a new sign we built last year out there welcoming people. The Turkish government built the visitor center in 1987, overlooking this site, and made it a national park for like the geological formation there to preserve it, so the villagers can't plow it up or whatever. So it is a preserved site here that's recognized by the government. There's a visitor center that we took over, renovating it in 2022. Before that, it was just an empty building. So now we have displays in there. We have posters. We have a short video you can watch. There's fossil examples from the area, and anyone can come up there. You can email me, contact me, or you look on Google Maps to figure out how to get out here yourself. Or you can join our tours if you have the funds and want to have us as a guide, and I can give the lectures. So we offer our own tours out here too.
Andrew, so if anyone would like to reach you, how can they do so? We just saw your website. If you can just tell us your website once more. And I know you have a YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, our website is Noah's Ark Scans with the S on the end, noahsarkscans.com. And from there, we have links on the bottom to our different social media. But our YouTube channel, which just hit over 500,000 subscribers recently, we're at Discovered Media. So it's not Noah's Ark Scans, but Discovered Media. And so on that YouTube channel, Discovered Media, we also have stuff about Mount Sinai in Arabia, the Exodus crossing, like different our travels, so it's fun stuff too, and the educational stuff, and just the latest updates too. So
Awesome, awesome. And I can't wait to look at that Red Sea crossing. Maybe you'll be back on for that one too.
yeah, yeah. No problem. No, yeah, we have done many trips there. We've been the only me and a friend. We went out there on a boat and we did sonar work from the Saudi Arabian side of the Red Sea. Now they don't allow boats out there on the Saudi side. So this was back in
Ah.
2018 and 19 we did this. But yeah, so I'm more than happy to talk about that and fill you in on our latest research about that.
All right. Okay. I'll take you up on that offer. So, all the information we'll have in the description below. So, if anyone would like to reach Andrew Jones, everything will be in the description below. Please visit. And, Andrew, before we leave, could you just pray for our audience right now?
Sure. Yes.
All right.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much that you've given us this opportunity to where we can freely talk about your word and the stories in the Bible, these historical events that people today, a lot of people are doubting your word and they don't believe that Noah's Ark existed or the Exodus happened. But we know that your word is true and that there's data out there, there's evidence that we can uncover that will show the Bible to be true. By faith, we believe in this, but we know there are people like Doubting Thomas who need that extra physical evidence, and you do not want anyone to perish. So you want as many people to be saved, and you're willing to help those who are searching for truth and they have a honest heart and looking for this type of information. And we pray that you could use us in your service and that this will be a blessing to many people. This podcast discussion, bless this video as it goes out around the world, that people can learn about it. And if they can come out here, that is great. But if not, then may they receive a blessing in their homes and on their phones when they see this information about the Bible. We thank you for your word and for the salvation that you have freely given to all of us. Please bless this ministry and thank you again for this opportunity. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen.
Amen. Andrew Jones, thank you so much. I mean, you live at the base of Mount Ararat, so I think it's pretty cool. All right.
I love it here. Yeah.
Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you'd like to be born again and give your life to Jesus Christ today, pray this prayer with me. Dear Jesus, I admit that I'm a sinner and am lost without you. I'm convinced that you're my only saving grace and my only hope. No longer do I want to do life without you. I believe that you came to earth to die on the cross for my sins, rose from the dead 3 days later, and are coming back for me one day soon. Please come into my heart and be my Lord, Savior, and friend. In Jesus' name, Amen. If you've prayed that prayer, get yourself a Bible and read it daily and ask God to interpret every word for you. Then surround yourself with like-minded believers in Jesus Christ. Congratulations and welcome to the family.